Janet was the first of three daughters. Her father, Mr. Dan, worked as a clerk at a small microfinance bank in town. He was not only wealthy, but he was deliberate. From the day each of his daughters turned one, he opened a savings account in her name. His vow was simple. No matter what sacrifices he had to make, his girls would go to school. By the time Janet gained admission to study medicine at the university, her education fund had grown enough to cover her admission fees, tuition, and books. It was the kind of preparation that gave her a steady start, proof of a father's foresight. But then, disaster struck. One afternoon at work, Mr. Dan collapsed from a stroke. He never recovered. Bedridden, he could no longer provide for the family. The steady, guiding presence that had carried them suddenly became a weight that needed carrying. Janet's education continued only because of the account her father had built for her, but it covered just tuition and books. There was nothing left for daily survival. After her father's stroke, Janet's life rearranged itself around necessity. The savings account he had opened for her meant she could remain in school, but it did not stretch far enough to cover accommodation or daily upkeep. She decided to live at home and commute, a choice most of her classmates could not imagine. The university hostel was a short walk from the lecture halls and laboratories, but to Janet, every naira mattered. Her budget became precise, almost mathematical. 500 naira daily for transport, no more, no less. Out of that, she had to move from her family's modest house to campus, sit through long hours of lectures, and still find her way back home at night. It meant waking at 5 a.m. to beat the rush and stumbling back, often close to midnight, after practicals or hospital postings. The routine was exhausting. She rose early enough to help her mother with small tasks, changing her father's bedsheets and preparing his breakfast, sometimes lifting him gently so he could be washed. Only then would she grab her bag and run for the first bus. At school, she stayed alert, taking notes and pushing herself to keep pace with students who had fewer burdens. While her friends could nap in their hostels between lectures, Janet sought corners of the library or hospital benches, dozing lightly before the next session. She carried the weight quietly. To her younger sisters, she was steady. To her mother, she was a dependable partner. But privately, she knew how thin her strength was stretched. Each day was a test of endurance. How far could she push her body on too little rest, too little food, and no margin for error? And yet, for a whole year, she endured. The second year, MBBS examinations were the first real hurdle of medical school. Everyone said this separated those who could carry the load from those who would fall away. For Janet, passing them was not just about her dream of becoming a doctor. It was about proving her father's sacrifice had not been wasted. That morning, she rose earlier than usual. It was still dark when she helped her mother adjust her father on the bed, cleaned his face, and set his medicine on the table. She moved quickly, her mind already on the anatomy questions that might appear on the paper. She checked her bag twice, pencils, erasers, exam card. Then, satisfied, she slipped out into the cool dawn. At the bus stop, other passengers jostled for space as the first commercial bus screeched to a halt. Janet was swept along, squeezed into a seat, her bag pressed tight against her chest. The conductor shouted for fares, and she reached into her bag for the folded 500 naira note she had placed there before leaving home. Her fingers searched once, twice, then frantically. The note was gone. Her chest tightened. She turned the bag inside out. Nothing. Maybe it had fallen when she squeezed into the bus, or worse, maybe a deft hand had lifted it in the scramble. She tried to explain to the conductor, her voice low at first, then desperate. "I had the money. I kept it here. Please, just give me a moment." The man's reply was swift and merciless. "No money, no seat. Oya, come down." The driver stopped abruptly, and Janet was pushed off the bus. The vehicle roared away, leaving her alone on a half-empty highway at a little past 5 in the morning. She stood frozen. The road stretched silent on both sides, dimly lit by distant street lamps. Her exam hall was miles away, and each second ticked like a hammer in her head. Panic rose in her throat. She started walking briskly, her steps uneven, her eyes darting to every pair of headlights that appeared in the distance. Each car passed without slowing. She lifted her hand, waved, pleaded with her eyes. No one stopped. The thought of arriving late, or worse, missing the exam entirely, clawed at her chest. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "I'm doing everything to make sure you get an education. Please, when the time comes, make sure you do your part." After several long minutes, a yellow taxi slowed beside her. The window rolled down, and the driver, a man in his late 50s, leaned out. "Where are you going, young lady?" he asked. "To the teaching hospital," Janet answered, her voice trembling. The man nodded, his eyes narrowing in thought. "That's far. It's 1,500 naira. I don't have it," Janet admitted quickly. "I had money, but it was stolen on the bus. Please, sir, I need to get there. I'm a student. My father is sick at home. Her words trailed into silence. The driver studied her for a moment. Something in her tone, or perhaps the way she clutched her bag as if it carried the whole weight of her life, softened him. He opened the door. "Get in. Don't worry about the fare." Relief washed over her as she slid into the back seat. The man introduced himself as Mr. Femi Ilori. On the drive, he asked why a medical student wasn't living on campus. Janet explained her father's stroke, the family struggles, and her daily commute. He listened, nodding slowly, then said, "I drive this road every morning at 5. From today, wait at this bus stop. I'll take you to school. No charge." Janet's throat tightened. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." For 3 years, Mr. Ilori kept that promise. The arrangement with Mr. Ilori became a part of Janet's life. Each morning, when the streets were still dark, she would wait at a familiar bus stop. Without fail, his yellow taxi appeared. Some mornings, they spoke about school, about his daughter who was about Janet's age, about the rising cost of petrol. Other mornings, they rode in silence, the steady hum of the engine carrying her closer to her future. For Janet, his presence was more than a ride. It was stability, a pocket of safety in days otherwise shaped by struggle. While others might have dismissed it as a small kindness, to her, it was lifeline after lifeline repeated daily. She could not have endured those years without it. Then, one morning, he told her he was leaving Lagos. He was returning to Abeokuta to take care of his aging mother. The words struck Janet like a sudden blow. Though she smiled politely and wished him well, she knew she could never repay him, but she hoped he understood the depth of what he had given her. A year later, her father died. The stroke that had confined him for so long finally silenced him completely. The house felt emptier than ever. Her mother wept quietly in corners. Her sisters tried to carry on, and Janet buried herself in her studies, grief mixed with determination. Her father had built the foundation, and strangers like Mr. Ilori had carried her across the gaps. To fail now would dishonor them both. So she pressed forward through the heavy textbooks, the sleepless nights in the hospital wards, and the relentless exams. She kept going. Each step forward was a quiet declaration that her father's sacrifice has not been in vain. 10 years passed. Janet had become a doctor, her name beginning to carry weight in medical circles. Colleagues spoke of her precision in surgery, her calmness under pressure, her refusal to cut corners. Patients trusted her. Administrators respected her. She was, by all appearances, everything her father had dreamt she would be. One morning, during a hectic shift, a nurse rushed to her with a file. "Emergency admission, kidney failure," the nurse said. Janet took the file, skimming it quickly. Then she froze. The name printed in block letters was Femi Ilori. Her heart kicked against her ribs. It could not be. The name was common enough, but something in her refused to dismiss it as coincidence. "Prepare him immediately," she ordered, her voice firmer than usual. "I'll handle this case myself." When the stretcher was wheeled in, Janet's breath caught. The face was older, deeply lined, the hair now gray, but the eyes were unmistakable. It was him, the taxi driver from her student days. "Mr. Ilori," she said softly. Though he was barely conscious, he did not recognize her. The years had remade her from a thin, anxious girl clutching a school bag into a confident doctor in a white coat. But she recognized him. Janet moved quickly, arranging dialysis and preparing for transplant. She monitored every stage as if her own life depended on it. Days stretched into weeks, and when the surgery finally succeeded, relief swept through the ward. Only then, as she began to recover, did she sit by his bedside and reintroduce herself. "Sir, I am Janet, the student you carried to school for 3 years." His eyes widened, disbelief mixing with memory. Mr. Ilori stared at her, searching her face as though time itself had played a trick. Slowly, recognition dawned. His lips trembled, and his voice came out in whisper. "Janet, the girl at the bus stop." She nodded, smiling. "Yes, sir, the same one. You may not remember all the mornings, but I do. Every single one of them." For a long moment, he was silent, his eyes filled with tears that he had made no effort to hide. The memory of a small, desperate student on a lonely road had never seemed so remarkable to him until now, as he lay in a hospital bed, alive because of her. When it was time to discuss bills, he reached for her hand. "Doctor, I don't know how to pay for all this. I don't have the kind of money a transplant requires." Janet shook her head gently. "You already paid, sir, 10 years ago. Every ride you gave me without asking for a thing, that was the down payment. This," she gestured to the ward around them, "is just me returning what I owe." The old man's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, but his eyes never left hers. Gratitude, disbelief, and humility flickered across his face all at once. "So kindness does return," he murmured. Janet answered without hesitation. "Always. Maybe not in the same form. Maybe not in the same season. But it finds its way back." In that room, the debt was settled, not with money, but with life exchanged for life. Kindness folded back on itself like a circle completed. When Mr. Illory was discharged, the hospital staff spoke of the skill of the surgical team, but Janet knew the story was larger than medicine. It had begun on a deserted road at dawn, when a frightened student was thrown off a bus and a stranger chose compassion over profit. The truth was simple. Her father's foresight had carried her part of the way, but strangers had lifted her further. Without Mr. Illory, she might have missed that crucial exam, stumbled in her studies, or even given up. His act had seemed small to him. An empty seat in a taxi filled each morning, but to her it was survival. Years later, when their paths crossed again, the balance of power had shifted. She was the one with the knowledge, the access, the skill to save his life. And in that moment, she understood kindness does not disappear. It lingers, it waits, and at the right time, it returns, often multiplied. Not everyone who shows compassion will be repaid in such dramatic fashion, but the principle remains. Every person you meet is carrying an untold story. How you treat them may one day matter more than you realize. To Janet, Mr. Illory was a driver who chose to help. To Mr. Illory, Janet became the doctor who preserved his life. Their story was not about miracles, it was about choices, ordinary human choices to do good when it was easier to walk away. And so, when Janet told her students years later that kindness is never wasted, she was not speaking in abstractions. She was speaking of a taxi driver on a Lagos road at dawn, and of the circle that had brought them back together.